Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Calling to order the regular meeting of the Inland Valley Development Agency on this Valentine's Day, February 14th, 2018. Mayor De La Rosa, would you please be so kind as to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, and would everyone please stand?
Stand on our green flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you so very much. Madam Clerk, would you please call roll call?
Certainly. Please state your name for the record. From the City of Colton.
Mayor Richard De La Rosa.
Isaac Suchel.
Thank you. From the City of Loma Linda.
Phil Duper.
Ovi Popescu.
Thank you. From the County of San Bernardino, 5th District.
Josie Gonzalez.
Thank you. And from the City of San Bernardino.
Virginia Marquez.
Jim Mulvihill.
Thank you very much.
All right. Mr. Executive Director, Mr. Burrows, closed session today?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, then we will be going directly into closed session. At this time, I will call and see if anyone from the public has any comment on closed session. Seeing no one, we will recess into closed session. We are back from, oh my goodness, we are back from closed session. Legal counsel, is there any reportable action as a result of closed session?
There are not, Madam Chair. However, I will note for the record that there was no discussion that took place on item B of the closed session agenda.
Very good. Let's see here. We'll call to order the open session of this Inland Valley Development Agencies, and we'll ask the board members to declare any conflicts at this time.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just announcing in closed session conflict with item B and D, and an open session conflict on item 8.
So that is B and D in closed session, and item 8 under the discussion calendar, correct?
Yes.
Very good. Anyone else? Seeing no one else, at this time, I will ask Mr. Burrows, are there any items to be added or deleted from the agenda?
No items.
All right. Any informational items?
Just one, and this is a status update that we were able to have a yet another productive meeting of the Oversight Board, and the annual ROPS for 18-19 was duly approved at that meeting and was timely filed for submission prior to the February 1st deadline for DOF.
Very
That
good.
concludes my report.
All right. At this time, I will entertain a motion to approve the consent calendar, items 3 through 6.
I'll move it.
I have a motion and I have a second. Any comments? Any opposition? Hearing none, it is so ordered. Moving on to item number 7, which is to receive and file the annual independent financial audit report of the Inland Valley Development Agency for the fiscal year ending June 30th of 2017. Mr. William Gray, would you be so kind as to present this item?
So Mr. Garay is unfortunately ill, so I will fill in, and actually our auditor.
You're right. He usually sits at the end. Where is he?
So his daughter's ill, unfortunately. He's
Oh, okay. All right. Well, hope everything.
He apologizes, but
all right.
being an
Sorry about
independent audit.
I looked at Mr. Harris as I said that, so I'm thinking that. Please proceed.
He's an engineer and a CPA. No. So being an independent audit, I would actually invite at this time, at your pleasure, to bring up, our partner with Edie and Payne, Eden Casareno, who would actually present the audit finding.
All right. Would you please come forward and state your name for the record?
Of the board. My name is Eden Casareno. I'm a partner in had performed audit of financial statements of items for June 30.
Was that page 9 you said? The audio seems to be going in and out. Apologize for that. Let's try it again and, yes.
So, and then on page 104, have the required communications, the governing body of the IVDA. And then on page 107, starting there, the matter where we have for our presentation slides, I would like to thank Mike, your restaurant, or either and the members of your staff for performing the audit. It's very helpful. That's all.
Hold on a moment. I think he's going to see what he can do for the audio. Thank you, sir.
So, I was going to talk about a little bit about the audit report, our financial highlights, some items regarding compliance.
I apologize for that.
Required communications, no, it's not on.
No, it doesn't
Are
seem
you
to be.
okay?
Go ahead.
Okay, and a single audit report also.
All right. I think this one's a little softer. You may have to just speak up
Okay.
just a little bit more.
So for this year, June 30, 2017 is what we were talking about. That's the fiscal year that we audited. Again, we have unmodified opinions on your financial statements. What that means is that the financial statements that were presented to you today are in conformity of accounting principles generally accepted in the United States. Those financial statements are the responsibility of management. Our responsibility as auditors was to audit the numbers that are behind them. If we're going to look at some of the highlights, this is not going to be, it is going to be very high level. I'm not going to talk about very much of the details. On the government-wide level, you have two types of activities. There's governmental and business type activities. Business type activities include water and the sewer fund. Those are enterprise funds that charge fees for services. And then all the rest are considered governmental. Not included in these numbers that you can see there is the successor agency, which is presented as a fiduciary fund separate from the government-wide financial statements. So you will see when you look at the financial statements that your net position for both the governmental and business type activities increased by $1.4 million. I showed on there revenues, expenses, and where the change in net position, which is $1.4 million. I apologize, I forgot to put in there that all these numbers are in thousands. I mean, yeah.
All these numbers are what?
In thousands.
In the thousands.
So
All
when I
right.
say 1,361 at the bottom of that list to the right, that's actually 1.361 million.
So it's, excuse me, I think I lost you. They're in the thousands, or it's 1,361,000?
That's
Is that
right.
what it is? All right,
That's right.
very good.
So your net position at June 30, 2017. The net position is what remains after you take all of your assets, the agency's assets, less your liabilities. That's what remains in your net position. That is a very good way to see where you're at as far as your financial stability. Now, I can show you in the next slide where you were from the past, but this is at June 30, 2017, and it shows you that you have $59 million in net position. 56% of that, or 33 million, are invested in capital assets. So those are not something that you can just sell. Obviously, you use those for your providing services as well as for your operations. The unrestricted amount, which is the second number to the, I can say, rightmost of the table, is $25.7 million. That is the amount that you would be available for future operations, for capital improvements, or just to use as your reserves.
How is that 25 million? That's not in cash, that's in securities of some sort?
Some of that is in cash. I think a lot of that is in cash and investments, but a lot of that is also in receivables.
Okay, I'm going to ask you if you would be so kind as to speak right into the microphone, because I'm not, hey, I lifted up just a little, right there. Because
okay.
I don't know about the other board members,
It
but
cuts out, huh?
Well, because you're speaking up
when
high,
you
you're
move
right
like
in
this,
microphone.
that mic isn't catching
Okay.
you.
Okay.
So, yeah, hopefully now. And I want to be able to understand and follow you as you make additions to the comments.
Okay.
So go ahead.
All right. So I'm going to move on to the next slide. That is the 5-year schedule of your net positions from 2013, 14, 15, 16, and 17. So the blue is your net investment in capital assets. That hasn't changed a lot from year to year. The red one is the unrestricted amounts. Those are your, like I said, available for operations. It jumped from 2013 to 2014 because you had a large revenue from, I believe that was a revenue participation agreement that you received in 2013.
So
Or
those that'll remember
2014, sorry.
the Hillwood check, that's what.
Yeah, it was like what, $12 million or something like that. And then from 15, 16, 17, it's kind of stabilized. So we're looking at probably similar things in 2018. There won't be any spikes that we are expecting. As I said, the successor agency is separate from those numbers that I just mentioned. The successor agency fiduciary net position decreased by $495,000 in 2017. As expected, that would continue to decrease because the successor agency continues to wind down. Hopefully, at the end, close enough, I guess maybe in a few years, it will just be all liabilities.
So in that case, on the successor agency, it's almost the converse of what you want to happen on the JPA, because as we pay off obligations, for instance, like the SB Sarah pension obligation, once that gets paid, even though there's a lot of tax money generated out of our area, it's not coming back to the successor agency. It's going to taxing entities per dissolution law. So you'll see that decrease over time. And that's the nature of a successor agency.
So I can stop here for a moment after I talk about the financial highlights, because the next slides will be different things. So if you have any questions, I can entertain them right now.
Any questions, board members? No? Please proceed.
Madam Chair, I have
Yes, sir.
questions on the audit itself, but it's not, this relates to this presentation.
Right, is it, I will just ask, is it relative to
The
the material that was just covered?
Well, it could or it couldn't be, because I'm referring to pages 38.
Page 38? All right,
Yes.
Under notes receivable, it mentions a 2009 uncollectible promissory note with a successor agency of over $1 million to Pacific Air Works.
Oh.
See, I'm wondering who can answer that, or it might be at the end of this.
Yeah, it probably will be better if we wait till
See,
maybe a
that
little
was-
bit.
all right, that'll be fine.
Okay.
Proceed.
So our audit procedures include consideration of internal control and compliance of the agency, compliance with regulations and laws and regulations. It also includes evaluating the appropriateness of accounting policies that are used by management, reasonableness of
You have to speak up a little bit.
Okay, so our audit procedures also include the reasonableness of significant accounting estimates and evaluating the presentation of the financial statements. So when we're talking about internal control and compliance, you could look at the single audit report, which starts on page 91 for the actual report on internal control and compliance. That is the required report by the government auditing standards. And then there's also a separate letter that starts on page 104 that explicitly tells you what other required communications we have required by us of the AICPA. So these are the gist of what we have in the internal control, compliance, and other communications reports. We reported that no material weaknesses in internal control have been found in the current year. We noted in that report that there were prior year recommendations that have been implemented by management also. There were no instances of non-compliance with laws and regulations. There were no accounting policies, no new accounting policies adopted. There were significant accounting estimates, but they are evaluated and reasonable. Sensitive disclosures will be Note 7 and Note 12 of the financial statements. And also, we're happy to say that we did not encounter any difficulties during our audit. So the single audit report, go ahead.
So on the, some of those some of those areas that were there, has it been workability with management to start to address some of those prior to the next audit? Or were they significant in the notes 7 and 10?
What were significant is that Note 7 and Note 10 relates to your long-term debt. So those are disclosures that are required to be presented in your financial statements. We consider them sensitive because there's a lot of sensitivity in looking at the long-term bonds. For example, there are covenants there that we disclosed. And also Note 12 relates to litigation. And so we would like to focus your attention to those notes.
Okay. So yeah, those are areas that are sensitive.
So the difference here is in some years you have an audit finding which says, hey, we found this, you should do not this way, but this way. In this case, a sensitive disclosure is this material, for instance, long-term debt. On the successor agency, we have to include that in a disclosure to bondholders about what's being paid. The fact is it's being paid, timely paid, so it's a good note, but the auditors have to isolate that because it becomes part of that disclosure in March to bondholders. And as far as the end of this, and you'll hear from Eden about recommendations on how we do better.
So single audit report. So the single audit report contains 3 different things. First one is the report on internal control and compliance, which I already discussed previously. And then there's a report on compliance for major federal programs. And that's the one that's being focused on in a single audit. You have one major federal program that was for the economic adjustment assistance from the U.S. Department of Commerce, approximately $1.2 million. I think $1.2 million was expended during the year. I mean, that was spent by the agency during the year.
So you all remember the DFAS 2 building, the office upgrades, and that was a federal grant. So that requires the auditors to do a single audit review to make sure we did all of those expenditures per EDA requirements.
That's right. So a single audit is required when any entity that receives federal grants spends $750,000 or more. So from year to year, we determine that if you spend more than $750,000, you have to be required to do a single audit. And that really focuses mainly on how you spend the federal dollars. That is reported to the federal agency that provided you the funds. Our report stated that the IVDA complies with compliance requirements related to its major federal program. So it's a pass. So I want to address now, before I go to other questions, the question regarding the note receivable to Pacific
Airworks Group.
Airworks. Yes. So that receivable loan was something that was already there when we started the audit. It was already reported. I think it was $1.6 million already at that time. And maybe Mike can tell us how that happened, but we saw the agreement that it was something that was agreed to by the agency way back then.
So this, for those that have been around for some time, when we first engaged this firm after the successor agency and JPA were split, the first year audit, of course, was a rather Herculean effort, but we had to isolate what was a successor agency debt and what was a JPA obligation. In this case, this was a redevelopment loan to a company at the airport at that time in 2009 known as Pacific Airworks Group. And it was a job incentive program for them to expand. Unfortunately, that entity failed. This audit firm identified that. It was brought to the Finance and Budget and Audit Committee, and at that time it was agreed that an allowance for bad debts would be created for that because the principals were nowhere to be found. I think in the course of this year's audit, of course, we always look back at successor agency debts just like any other debt. And as we have agreed with the audit firm that going into this year, we'll go back and review that with the auditors, with legal team, again, to see if truly it is uncollectible and therefore justifiably written off as bad debt. So it's not the JPA, it's a successor agency. But we have spent some legal time and money since 2014 trying to address that, and these principals, unfortunately, highly leveraged and not readily able to be sourced to collect on that debt. That was the result of the legal review. But appropriately, it's still on the books, and we should do a fresh analysis going into this year.
Yes, so that is our recommendation, is to, again, consider if there's anything that can be collected from that receivable, and if it's truly 100% uncollectible, then we recommend that it be written off. Obviously, this is a successor agency asset that probably needs some legal, resolution before that can be done.
Madam
Any,
Chairman, another question.
Go ahead.
Page 41 talks about 2014 bonding, bond refunding, and tax allocation bonds. Paragraph 3 talks about an economic loss of 72, over 72. What is the background? I think, Mike, you would have that.
So I'm actually going to defer to Eden on that because there's a rather complex procedure when they had to go through. These are successor agency bond obligations. So in 2014, Lord willing, we were able to do a comprehensive refinancing of all of the debt, to that point in time, and it was a required refinancing. Thankfully, it was successfully completed, but in the successive year, the auditors were then, of course, tasked with then recognizing that refinancing in our financials. And they just so happened that year that they had yet another guidance through their requirements on how that was computed. And so the loss is not what you would expect on a normal investment basis. It is a calculation the auditors have to do on booking that in our financial statement. So I'll let you get into the weeds of that because you and Richard got to do that funding.
Okay, let me see if I understand. The question is that when you had a refinancing, there was a loss on that was disclosed. So the loss. Let me see if I can find the amount in here.
It's on paragraph 3.
Page 41, right?
Yeah, you're 41.
Oh, okay, so it said the debt service payments for the new bonds will exceed the debt service payments for the old bonds by $76 million and will result in an economic loss of $72 million using effective rates ranging from 4.5% to 5.5%. That's on the last sentence of the third paragraph in that page, page 41. So what we normally calculate is what would be the debt service payments from the beginning of that bond and compare both of them. So from the beginning of, I can't remember, the May 15, 2014, what would have been the payments to the end of maturity of those bonds. So the 2011 bonds have already been maturing before then. So there's redemption going on at that point. Even though there was a better interest rate at that time, on May 2014, I think, or June 2014, it was going to balloon up. So if you had paid the balloon payment, then you wouldn't have this loss. But because you extended the time period of paying the debt, then you would have a loss over time. But it is not a loss that's included in your financial statements. It's merely a disclosure. So it just says that if you had paid it off, you would not have this loss.
And to get in that spot in time, the 2011 bonds only dealt with a certain amount of debt. The 2014 bonds are a comprehensive refinancing of all of loans and bonds, and it's a one-stop shop. Dissolution law required us to do the refinancing to avoid the balloon payments that Ms. Castrano mentioned.
Any additional questions? All right.
Thank you very much, and thank you to Mike.
Mike, do you have anything to add to this?
Other than we do appreciate the opportunity to work with Edie and Payne as a firm this year. If you recall, we did go through our process as required by our policies to go out to market to essentially procure new audit services, and Edie and Payne was the selected firm again to continue those services. So one of the things as staff that we appreciate is they do look at our procedures each year. In our entrance conferences, I always ask them to look at any policies that we have and make any recommendations on how we as your staff can do a better job of keeping these books clean and high and tight. And they have done that as they have in years past. So that's part of what you pay them to do.
Do we, by any chance, anticipate that there might be any financial challenges meeting our fiduciary duties in the future in regards to what's taken place with DOF lawsuits we have previous received funds that now will be no more?
Now, certainly on the litigation side, as you've heard, we are trying to get resolution on a few remaining contracts through the dissolution process. Certainly, we hope for positive outcomes on those issues, but your strategic plan and your annual budget is structured to live within our means. Thankfully, our debt service for our bonds and our coverage gets better and better with the growth and jobs and investment that this body has worked hard to support here. So as far as paying bills and paying off debts, we've actually gotten stronger because, that has been additional tax revenue to this region from the jobs and investment that IVDA has helped bring. So, of course, we would like to do more projects, and with swift resolution of those remaining issues with DOF, it means we can do more faster, but we've taken great care to make sure that we're not overextending ourselves and committing to things that we can't afford.
Very good. Any other questions? Hearing none, this is a receive and file.
Yes, ma'am.
All righty then. Let me get back to my items here. I apologize. Moving on to item number 8, which is to consider and discuss a report on the status of the United States Department of Commerce Economic Development Administration grant application for 3rd and 5th Streets Corridor Improvement Project. Mr. Burrows, would you make this item's presentation?
Yes, and this is something we just want to make sure you've got the latest and greatest on. You've heard me talk about this grant application. Ms. Beltran, as she worked through the process to go out and get new money. The good news is we have it. I wanted to put on the record for you all that with the prior authorizations you've given with federal EDA and federal funding in general, they did approve this grant. The San Manuel Band of Mission Indians will be doing much of the administration. We will be supporting that with the City of Highland as our partner, and it is fully funded. So the grant has been received. The grant award from the Seattle office has been executed by all parties, and this is one of the ways that we can do projects by getting more and more grant money. So we just wanted to make sure that you had the full report that it is a go. With our federal government right now and some of the funding, not all agencies are getting all the money to do projects like this, but in this case we were very fortunate, and we've got good partners. So that's the extent of my report. The actual project start, much of the design is completed on this because this agency and the City of Highland have invested in much of that corridor, but one of the key access points that this creates that was once there but not there now is a new connection to connect 3rd Street back to 5th. So as you come out of the airport, you'll actually be able to go through Palm, back up, and then come out on 5th directly onto the 210 freeway. Years ago, that was the case. We're now putting that back with Highland's support. The other big investment in this, aside from curb and gutter, sidewalk, and new streets with no potholes, hopefully, is a widening of the abutment underneath the 210 freeway at 5th Street. So that'll take it from 6 lanes to 8 lanes. That creates more throughput and less congestion. So good support from everybody, and just really pleased we were able to get it done in a tough year.
Right, and that's really nice. I understand we received notice that the item had been approved
Yes.
last month, and it's nice to see another $7,058,000 coming in for a project.
So once we get with San Manuel and have our project kickoff with federal EDA, we will certainly give you an update on the schedule of this project and when we can anticipate construction starting. But we really appreciate, as our partners do, for your support of this, and it was a big win for us.
Very good. Is there any additional discussion or questions from board members? For the record, please note, Madam Clerk, that Supervisor Ramos has left the meeting. Any questions? Legal counsel, is this a just receive and file? It says consider and discuss. Was there any ancillary question?
There's no action required on it at this time, Madam Chair.
All right. Thank you very much. Very good. Moving on to item number 9, which is to review status of the action plan for the Inland Valley Development Agency through June 30th of 2018. Mr. Burrows, once again, would you make this item's presentation?
So in February, what we have just achieved with your help is receiving the annual audit report, and obviously we are on schedule for that. That puts us in good standing to do the continuing disclosure to bondholders that we're required to do by March 31st, and of course, as we discussed, this is a key document in that package. Coming with that, though, into early next month will be the update to our overall tax revenue picture. So our fiscal consultant, RSG, is finalizing that verification report, and we will be presenting, I think, the outcome of that at your next meeting. Obviously, if you've seen with the investments with our partners at Hillwood, we do expect for a good result, but I've not, nor has Reshma or Bill, seen the actual results on taxes paid and received. But we will have that for you at the next meeting. And as I reported, the annual ROPS was timely filed. We certainly would like to engage with DOF to move things along and, provide a nice clean packet for the Countywide Oversight Board coming up here later this year. So that is our goal. Next month, we will have an update for you with Hillwood on the status of the Northgate development project. That's one of our initiatives for this year. And that concludes my report.
Very good. And for those new members, just very briefly, the strategic plan reports monthly give us those key dates that we then can look at as certain dates for deliverables for already board identified priority projects. And that's key because it helps us to to figure out, to give an assessment as to, are we staying in the timeline? Are we doing what we said we were supposed to do? And if not, we don't have to be running to play catch up later on. We know in point in time that we need to make some adjustments. So hopefully this helps. Are there any questions on this item? Seeing none, once again, this is just a review item.
Yes, this is a review, receive and file.
Very good. Moving on to anyone from the public. Want to open public comment. Anyone from the public wishing to come forward to speak on an item that is on or off the agenda? Seeing no one come. At some point, we are going to get some public input here.
I can step down.
We cannot be doing all this important business and not have people clamoring to come up. All right, I will close the public comment section of this meeting. And board members, any comments at this time? Seeing none, I will adjourn this meeting to our next regularly scheduled meeting of the IVDA, which will be Wednesday, March 14th at 3 p.m. Happy Valentine's Day. Be good, be kind, go have some fun.